Hi guys and welcome back. Today I'm going to do a little mini tutorial on how I like to paint the hair in my paintings, specifically how to get this really flowy, more twisty, complex looking hair. And I do want to give, of course, a huge thank you to the sponsor of the video today, and that is Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community. They have countless classes on really incredible creative endeavors, and I love being able to go there to get new ideas for things to spark some creative energy in my life, or to go and get refreshers on things that I already know but I want to get reacquainted with. So what I did is I went back and watched the class Modern Watercolor Techniques from Kat Coquelette. That was really helpful. She goes through all sorts of different steps over there on actually painting with watercolors, and I love being able to just get that quick refresh of reminding myself how to use it, how to do the techniques. And there are so many other classes over there on Skillshare. I love being able to go over there and get new ideas. And Skillshare is only $10 a month if you get the annual subscription. And of course, I have a code down in the description for the first 500 people to go over there. You'll get 2 months free, so you can go check it out and see if you like this kind of learning process. I love classes. It really helps me to be able to learn in that kind of a way. So I do want to show a quick little diagram of how I approach drawing the hair. Mostly this is focusing on painting today. I would love to do an actual drawing tutorial for the hair and how I actually draw it later, but for now this is a really quick approach to how I structure it so that it looks more complex than it actually is. So as I'm sketching this out, this is basically the hierarchy of how I draw it in real time. So I will start at the scalp and work away from that, from where the hair is actually growing out, and then I will do a lock of hair that frames the face, usually on the side where most of the hair is being parted. And as I get farther away from the face, that's when I can get much more expressive and abstract with the shapes that the hair is actually creating. And then after I create that first lock of hair that has this twist that I want and is flowing in the right way, I will go back and frame the face on the other side. And then I will build up the hair around the back of the head so that there is some actual shape and structure to the character. And then as I'm working in this blue color, I start to fill in shapes that are left open. So areas, say, behind that first lock of hair that I did and her neck and her face, I'll fill that in, or I'll build up around areas that need just a little bit more. And this is really where I get to play around with the composition of the piece and the other elements that are in the painting as well, so that I can really just use the hair to keep the eye going where I want it to go, and I can fill in any spaces that I need. I also like to make sure that there's a lot of flow and certain unexpected ways that the hair can go. And also, it is also very important to make sure that you pay attention to the volume of hair. So if I have a certain lock of hair that's growing out, if it suddenly gets much thicker, it needs to have hair that could be flowing in from another place to add to it so that it makes sense and it looks like how hair actually would behave. Okay, so jumping into actually painting, I like to mix up several different versions of the color of hair that I'm painting. So I'll have a little bit of a warmer and a bit of a cooler color, and today I'm using this minty green. So at the top of the head, I planned on having that a little bit more on the side of a warm yellow green, and then as it goes farther away from her head, it becomes a little bit cooler. This is just a rule of thumb for myself as I'm working on it, because I want there to be a mixture of these different greens throughout her hair. It just keeps a lot of movement to it, and it makes it look much more lively, and I like that, but having a certain approach helps it to also make sense as I'm working on it. So this is where I'm just blocking in the base layer of watercolor down, and I'll jump around to different areas as different places are still wet and they're drying. So I put a little bit more of the green up at the top, and then I have areas where I know it's going to be in shadow, like around her face and her neck. That area I will do a little bit more of the cooler blue green in areas like that. And I also try to make sure that as one area, once it's dry and I can paint next to it, that if I had a section that was a little bit bluer, if I have hair next to it in a different lock of hair, then I can do that a little bit more of a yellow green, so that each strand, each section stands out a little bit from those that are around it. And then I start blocking in some of the shadows. So This time I'm focusing mostly on using more concentrated versions of the same paint that I used already for the hair. This keeps it very saturated and bright. If I wanted it to have more of a natural look to the shadows, then I would be adding in more of a complementary color to it so that it would have more of a desaturated look to the shadows. But again, I wanted this to feel very candy colored and bright, so I'm using those same colors for the shadows. And I also jump around quite a bit in this stage as well. I find that it just helps me to keep it a little bit more consistent so I don't end up with areas where all of the shadows are a little bit more cool and then I look over in another section and it's all much warmer shadows, because as I'm working on this, I will run out of certain colors and I'll mix new ones. And I just love this process of being able to have this very soft organic approach to having the colors in the hair. So I don't stress too much about mixing the right amount of each color. If I'm jumping around, it means that it's going to have the right look to it. Whereas if I mixed up what I think was going to be an exact amount of an exact color that was going to be in the shadow for the entire painting and I ran out, then it would be really hard to match, and certain areas that I didn't paint in with that wouldn't look quite the same. So I find that this is a much more pleasant approach to painting it. So it's not nearly as stressful as trying to make sure that everything is a perfect match. And it does have a lot more interest to it, in my opinion. But at this point, I also know that I am going to use line work. I love line work in my watercolors, and it's a really integral part to how I structure the hair that I'm painting. So there are certain areas that when I'm adding the shadow, I know that I will add more of a shadow effect, like a micro shadow, I guess, with the line work. So there will be more piecey sections that will happen in a step later. So I try to keep that in mind so that I don't go too overboard with structuring it all out with these washes, and I don't leave any room for those more delicate lines that will come after the fact. And now we're probably to my favorite step. This is the part where I get to put in the line work with the watercolors. It takes the longest, but it's so satisfying to watch those more rough edges get really sharpened and cleaned. So for the line work that I do in my watercolors, I always try to mix it a little bit more pigmented than I normally do for any of my washes. I want it to be closer to opaque if I can get it, and I always try to pick darker pigments when I'm mixing it. So for this one, I used mixtures of ultramarine blue and a couple other greens that I had for the actual base of the hair. But then when it came time to do the line work, I picked Payne's Gray instead of that ultramarine so that it had a much darker color to it, but it still was very cool since Payne's Gray is a very cool gray color. And then I also use a very, very sharp brush. I'll have the specific one that I use linked down in the description so you can check that out. It's from Trekell. I love them. I am an affiliate from them, so if you buy from them, I get a little bit of a kickback, which is very helpful for me, but I genuinely adore these brushes. And this one in particular has been my absolute favorite for doing the lines. And I just take my time and I try to be very consistent with the pressure and the flow with my hand. This is one of those steps that it really just takes a bit of practice, where you can just sit down with some paint, with that paintbrush that you end up picking out with your paper, and then you can just do lots of lines like this to get a feel for the right kind of pressure, the right speed that you need to get the look that you want. But once you figure that out, it becomes a lot easier. It takes a bit of learning to get there. And I just like to make sure that I'm paying attention to the areas that I'm actually lining. So if it's going to be lighter, or in this case more of a yellow green, then I will choose the pre-mixed version of the line work color that I have that is the lighter, more yellow green color. And that's one of the best things that I've found that goes into actually doing the line work with the watercolors, rather than say with like micron pens or other pens, is that you can really fine tune the actual color that you're using for the line work. So for this, I can do this more yellowy green color, and then I can get a much darker color in the areas that are going to be defining the darker shadowy areas of the hair, and that keeps it much more dynamic and interesting to look at. So it's always important to pay attention to what are you actually defining. Is it two very light shades? Then use a lighter a lighter color for that. If it's two really dark ones or it's dark against a light, then maybe use a darker color for that. Also, sometimes, depending on the piece and how graphic I want it, I will have a little bit more contrast for the things that are closer to the frame. Even if it has a really light section of hair, I can go in with a really dark line work. A little bit more like that first initial lock of hair that I showed in the diagram of me drawing. I go in with a darker line, and that really just makes it look really sharp and closer to the viewer. And then the sections of hair that get farther away, I will go in with a more mid-tone color for the line work, and that helps it to look like it's receding into the background. And after I finish doing the background, I'll go back in with that darker line work color and just redefine the edge of the hair between the background and the character for anything that got eroded while I was doing the watercolor wash. So again, that's something to be aware of with doing line work with watercolor, is that the watercolor is going to erode into it. It will reactivate those. So you do need to be careful about when you're painting and painting up against line work. It may just mean that you have to come back and tidy things up. It's just something to be aware of and to pay a little bit more attention to. And hopefully that just provided a little bit of insight on how I like to paint the hair in my paintings and how I get this more flowy looking kind of hair. I do, of course, have that link down in the description. For the first 500 people to use that code, you'll get 2 months free over on Skillshare, so you can go check it out and see if you like it. And of course, I want to give a huge, massive thank you to all the patrons over on Patreon. You guys are incredible. I can't thank you enough for all the support that you do give me, and you help me to be able to continue making these videos and to continue making the artwork that I do. So thank you guys so much for that. You are incredible. But that's about it for today, so I will be back next week with another art video. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you then.